Everybody, and welcome to this evening's episode of Live Without Training Wheels. I am your host, Lynna Sutherland. I'm the owner and author of Homeschooling Without Training Wheels, and I'm also the mother of 8 kiddos, ages teen to toddler. And I am so excited tonight to be joined by my friend Carlita Boyles, who is the creator of Math on the Level, which is something that I've talked about quite a number of times on the blog and around various spaces on the internet. So I'm thrilled that we get to chat with her live tonight. And we will do that in just a moment, but let me go through some housekeeping details just to make sure that you are comfortable here. First of all, if you are watching us live from Facebook or YouTube, that is awesome. You're welcome to just keep watching from where you are. However, I do want to let you know that Carlita and I are actually inside the platform called Crowdcast, and that's where we'll be seeing comments and answering questions. So if you'd like to interact with us, or especially if you've got questions that you'd like to ask Carlita, if anything she says sparks your curiosity and you'd like to ask more, you'll want to find the link in the video description and follow us on over here into Crowdcast so that we can see those questions and answer them for you. You're going to get the best engagement from a desktop because, thumb typing, but if you're not on a desktop and you're on a mobile device, that's totally fine. You'll just want to turn your device into landscape mode, and then press the little square in the top right corner so that you can go to full screen mode and tap view chat, and you'll be set to go. Also, if you are here with us in Crowdcast, it's really fun to answer the poll. It's completely anonymous, but it will give us a great idea of the audience that we have here with us tonight. So as I'm looking at the poll, I can see that we've got a large percentage of our votes coming in from 13 to 17 as the greatest age range of your children. Oh, somebody with an 18-year-old. Somebody over 18. And then also I'm curious to know, do you have a child who struggles with math? And so far, 100% of the people who are here tonight have said, yes, they have somebody who struggles with math. So I'm really glad you're here because I think Carlita has some things to share that are going to be very encouraging for you. Also, right next to the button that says polls, there's a button that says ask a question. And so at any time during our discussion, if you've got a question that you want to drop in, go ahead and do that. And the thing I love about Crowdcast is that if you see a question that someone else has asked that you are also interested in hearing more about, you're going to want to upvote that question. Sometimes we have a chance to get to all the questions. Sometimes we don't. It just depends on the night and how many questions there are. But if there's one that you are really eager to hear Carlita address, then you're going to want to upvote it because we'll just start with the ones that look like they will be of interest to the most people, and we'll go from there as time allows. So I am going to get to talking with Carlita in just a minute, but I told her that I'm going to do something a little different, and I'm going to just take just a minute to tell you a little bit about the background behind how it is that I know Carlita and how I got interested in Math on the Level. Now, I've talked in many different spaces about why I call my blog Homeschooling Without Training Wheels. And it's because when I began homeschooling, as I think many, many moms do, I began with a very schooly model. And especially for me, I had been a 2nd and 3rd grade teacher before I started homeschooling. So I had this idea of what I thought homeschooling was supposed to look like, and it was very similar to a traditional classroom. And I think that worked out fine at first. I mean, you have to start somewhere. You don't know what you're doing. It's okay to use somebody else's recipe or somebody else's model to just get you going, kind of like using training wheels on a bike, right? Like they're just support. They help you get started. But at a certain point, once you've gotten your balance, training wheels become like more of a hindrance than a help, right? Because you could have so much more flexibility without the training wheels. And so that's exactly what I experienced with math. By the time I had my 4th child officially school-aged, and I had 4 different math textbooks and 4 different math, lessons to teach each day. And then I was checking each one and returning them. And the thing that really got my attention was when my oldest, who is just a natural math thinker, and he would talk about math for fun, he would tell people that he hated math. And I realized that what he was saying was, I hate my math schoolwork. And it just was making me die inside that this child who had natural math abilities thought that that's what math was like filling out worksheets, and especially like doing endless long division problems, and then they'd be marked wrong, and then he'd have to tediously go through all of it and find the mistake. And to him, that's what math was. And of course he hated that. So a friend of mine said, I think you should check out Math on the Level. And I did. And Math on the Level is the program that Carlita has created. She's homeschooled 3 children to graduation. And it's a program where instead of thinking about math in grade levels, you're thinking about math conceptually. So, hey, let's talk about fractions. Hey, let's talk about money. Hey, let's talk about measurement. And we're looking at these concepts kind of without the restraints of like, what is a first grader supposed to do? What is a second grader supposed to do? And so not only was that mind-blowing in a way to think about math, but it was mind-blowing in terms of teaching math to a wide range of ages of children. And of course, they couldn't all do the same thing. But when you're doing things hands-on, it's really surprising how many things they really can all do together, even little ones. So that's a super brief overview about math on the level. I could say tons more, but I don't want to take up the time that we've set aside to talk about this. The reason I brought Carlita here tonight is because, so yes, Rochelle, at the Q&A time, I will tell you more about how to go find out about math on the level. A couple of years ago, maybe a year ago, I got this email, and it was from a publisher who has some math related things. And the email's heading, the subject line said something like, "Is your child falling behind in math?" And it went on to detail studies from, I think the ACT, like the board that does the testing, about how if studies show that if your child is behind in math by the 4th grade, they only have a 1 in 3 chance of ever, catching up or being ready for college or careers or something. I mean, it's just like this really scary kind of a research study, and especially the way that this provider, this merchant was using it was kind of like a scare tactic. Like, you need to panic about your child's math abilities, and you need to like freak out and give us your credit card number so we can, fix this problem. And it super rubbed me the wrong way. And so I was fortunate enough to get to talk to Carlita at a homeschool convention not too long after that. And I kind of started with this like, okay, I know something's not right about this, but I can't really quite put my finger on it. But Carlita had some actual wise, thought out things to say about it. And I thought, yeah, let's have that conversation on the Live Without Training Wheels show so that you guys can hear and so that you can, kind of have this really helpful, encouraging perspective shift about that. So that's a really long explanation of why I brought Carlita on here tonight and a little bit of a teaser of what we're going to talk about. But let's backpedal for just a second because I do want you to know Carlita and a little bit about her. So Carlita, you've done a great job of just smiling and looking lovely while I ran on and on. But I'm going to let you talk a little bit now. So can you just start out by telling us a little bit about yourself and your children and how you got into math on the level and creating that?
Okay. I have 3 children, like you mentioned. They are now all adults. I homeschooled them from kindergarten all the way through graduating high school. My oldest 2 have graduated college. My youngest is in his 2nd year of college. And I've been married for almost 30 years now to an amazing guy named John. And he helped create and edit the curriculum. I did not ever intend to write a math book or math curriculum. That was not on my bucket list at all. Because I have a special ed background, when I was homeschooling, a lot of times I would talk with moms about their kids who are struggling. And one time our homeschool group asked me to do a workshop on using games to teach math. So in the process of that, I was explaining how I used just 5 problems a day to review the math that the kids had learned instead of having them do pages and pages of math problems. And I suggested that they teach through things like cooking and shopping and playing games instead of getting stuck in the math books, especially if they had a child who was frustrated or struggling. And after the workshop, some of the moms came up to me and they said, "We would love to teach math like you do, but we don't have your teaching background. Would you write a curriculum?" And I'd never thought about that before. But I went home and talked with John, and that's how it got started. So it took us about a year to write it. Then we had to start selling it, which had never occurred to me and is not my favorite thing in the world at all. But it's just been a delight to be able to talk with so many people about math.
Yes. Yeah. And just to share what has been helpful to you, as an
Yeah.
outworking of that homeschool experience. So you mentioned that you have a background in working with special needs students. So how did that
Mhm.
shape your the work that you did with your children in the homeschool, and then spreading on out to helping other families?
Well, like you mentioned, I started out assuming that I would take the classroom home, and that's what school would be. I taught special ed for about 12 years. I worked with children with learning disabilities. And when I started teaching, I even made my kids call me Mrs. Boyles the first day. I went so far into the classroom model. I dropped that really fast. But when I taught special ed, the thing that I really liked about special ed teaching was that you diagnose the child's issues and you teach specifically to the child.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like when I did teach a little bit of 6th grade, and in that situation, you kind of are teaching to a large group and you have not nearly as much flexibility. But in special ed, I was able to find the children's strengths and teach to their strengths rather than hammering on their weaknesses.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really helpful. So I think the whole experience of getting a mindset of finding where your children are strong, using that as a way to teach where they struggle, not always making the focus be on where they're weak. When I worked with my own kids, I started out classroom focused, got frustrated really quickly because I didn't want to be teaching one child fractions and one child decimals. And, I wanted them I wanted to work as a family. I wanted to do the same activities, and the books weren't staying in the same areas. They were going into different areas. So I ended up dropping the books pretty much every year for about the first 3 years. And I would start out thinking, okay, I'm going to do it right this year. I'm going to use the book. And within a month, I would have dropped it and gone back to teaching through life and doing my own thing. And then finally I realized, this is right. I don't want to be doing the books anymore.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
I love that, especially that ability that we have in the homeschool to be more, tailored to the individual students that God has given us. So
right.
I promised everybody that we'd talk about being behind in math, and that idea of being behind. And I don't know about you, but this is a comment that I get from moms all the time. Like, I'm worried that I'm not doing enough. I'm worried that they're going to be behind. I don't know what my child this age or this grade is supposed to be able to do. So how do you respond when moms talk to you about that idea of, like, are they behind? Are they below grade level? Are they, however they put it?
Yeah. Well, actually, in Math on the Level, we don't use grade levels at all. There are no grade levels, and as you know. And actually, that was probably the hardest battle I had to fight in writing Math on the Level, because everybody told me I had to have some kind of grade level. They all said I needed some way for parents to be able to tell if their kids were ahead or behind. But I have a really strong conviction that every child is unique.
Mm-hmm.
And, we're fine with the uniqueness of development physically. We understand that one child will walk at 8 months, one walks at 14 months. We don't take the child who walks at 8 months and say, oh my goodness, this kid's going to be in the Olympics. We've got to make sure that, he's such a great athlete. And we don't take the one that walks at 14 months and say, oh, this kid needs physical therapy before he can ever ride a bike. We understand that when they develop doesn't indicate how good they'll be at that subject. But we kind of forget that the brain develops in a progression just like the body does. And not everybody's brain develops it the same way. Algebra requires abstract reasoning that isn't present at birth. It develops. And there's even studies now that show that some of the judgment brain development isn't there during adolescence. And that you may have seen a lot of the research lately that says that teenagers don't make good judgments because their brains haven't matured yet. That part of the brain hasn't matured. So if we expect every child to learn the same concept at the same time, we're setting them up for failure. So it's important as moms to realize that if you have a child who seems to be below grade level in math because they're not learning what other fourth graders learn or other fifth graders learn, that doesn't mean they're not brilliant in math. It just means that those brain connections haven't matured yet for the child to understand those concepts. And the problems come, one of the biggest problems come in that, first of all, if we start pushing the concepts too early, the child believes he's bad at math. He's frustrated because he doesn't understand it. He doesn't know why he doesn't understand it. It ought to make sense. Everybody else gets it. He's stupid. So he gives up. And the other thing is that the math doesn't stop. The new concepts don't stop. So if the child may have just memorized steps to get the right answer without understanding what's happening, and then he keeps getting more and more and more concepts piled on that he's not ready for. And he never got a chance to go back and understand those first concepts.
So a lot of moms, I think, intuitively get this idea that our children develop at different paces. And maybe even that's part of the thought process and why they chose to homeschool. Like, oh, yes, I want each of my children to be able to learn at their own pace. And we're going on feeling some measure of comfort and confidence with that. And then we read a study like this one that says that, like, oh, if your child has fallen behind by fourth grade, then they probably won't catch up by eighth grade, and they probably won't catch up by 12th grade. And it affects their college acceptance, and it affects their, like, even this article that I was reading, like their lifetime earning wage. Like, wow, great way to make a mom freak out. So tell us some about, like, what do you make of a study like this? What does this say to you that's not freak out because your child is a failure already in third grade?
Right. Well, first of all, think about what they studied. They took a classroom environment. In a classroom, you have a first grade math book, you have a second grade math book, you have a third grade math book. If you have a child like this, in every classroom, you're going to have some children who haven't matured enough to understand those concepts. So what they've said is the kids who weren't mature enough in fourth grade to learn the concepts they were supposed to learn never got them taught. That's really what the study says. It doesn't say that they couldn't have learned it if they went back and did the foundations again. But in a classroom, what does that say? If you are in a fourth grade classroom and what you need to learn is in the first grade book, what does that do to your self-concept? You know, when I taught special ed, a lot of times I got kids in fourth grade. That seemed to be, the boys particularly would be placed in special ed in fourth grade. And the first few months of getting a new student, I had to work primarily on getting them to try again because they were so used to not understanding that they wouldn't even try. If they didn't try, they couldn't fail. And it was a lot easier for them to say, I didn't even try, than to say, I couldn't do it.
Yeah, not to take the risk.
Right. And so you've got kids who are in that system where they feel stupid because they didn't understand it. The only way they can learn it is to go back 2 or 3 grades, which is going to add to their feeling stupid. So in our public school system, it's very, very difficult to take a child who's behind and really catch them up. So in a sense, that probably is an accurate survey of that system, but we're not in that system. So we don't have to pay any attention to how they did it because we can do it differently. Yeah.
And we tend to think that, so like you just said a minute ago, maybe you have a fourth grader who needs to learn some first grade concepts. So in our grade level oriented minds, we think then they have 3 years worth of work to do. Like it will take 3 years for them to be able to do fourth grade work. Is that true?
Well, actually, there was a study done. There was a class in, I believe it was the 20s and 30s, where they actually delayed formal math. And basically, they didn't teach it until 6th grade. And within 1 year, the kids who had never been taught formal math ended up, their classrooms became the top in the school district. So when you actually think about what needs to be taught between kindergarten and 6th grade, there's not really that much. But we spread it out and we start teaching it really early. And for some kids, they're ready, and that's appropriate. But there's a lot of kids who aren't ready. Mm-hmm. And for them, they have to learn the same things year after year after year because they didn't really understand it before.
Yep.
So, you know, you can teach so much more efficiently if you teach when your kids are ready to learn.
That's so true. Okay, I have to share a little story here. So my daughter, when she turned 8, this is my 4th child, and she was the first one. So she was the one who came on board with homeschooling and kind of like, you know, sunk the boat. Like she was the one where I was like, oh my goodness, I just can't even. And so we kind of like dropped the ball that year in a good way and started experimenting. That's when I found math on the level. So she was my first child who didn't go through the kindergarten math book, 1st grade math book, 2nd grade. And so when she turned 8, her older sisters decided that she needed an analog watch for her birthday. Uh-huh. So they gave her this watch, and here we are at this family party with, you know, aunts and uncles and grandparents and everybody there. And she opens this watch and she says, "Oh, can you teach me how to tell time?" And she's 8, right? Uh-huh. So it's sort of like, oh, you know, I should have done that. Like my child is behind. I didn't, you know, but the thing is that she already had so much life experience. Like she'd been figuring out time on a digital clock for a long time because she knows like this is bedtime and this is when we have lunch and this is when you get up. She already had concepts of AM and PM, hours and minutes, like all of those things had just sort of seeped in through life. And so I pulled her up on my lap and I was like, oh yeah, okay, so this hand is this and this hand is this, and you count by 1s and you count by 5s, and 5 minutes later she's telling time on an analog watch. Whereas in public school, it's like, oh, well, you have to teach them, you know, time to the hour in kindergarten and time to the half hour in 1st grade and time to the quarter hour in 2nd grade, and in 3rd grade, time to the minute. And it's like a 3-year process, but it took 5 minutes because she was 8 and she wanted to know.
Yeah. I had a mom who told me a similar story. She said that she dreaded teaching long division because she had had such a hard time teaching long division. And when her child, who was in math on the level, she started with math on the level, she decided not to even teach it. So they were doing math in real life. They were doing all these other things. And the little girl was figuring out division logically, but she'd never been taught how to write it out pencil paper. Mm-hmm. So one day when she was in 6th grade, she came up to her mom and said, "Mom, there has got to be an easier way to figure this out." And her mom said, "Yeah, it's called long division, and this is how you do it." And she showed her, and the girl said, "Oh, great, thanks."
Love
and
it.
That was it.
I love it. Yep. I love it. And and we have the opportunity for moments like that when we take off the pressure of like, but you're a 2nd grader, you have to do this now, or you're a 4th grader, this is what 4th graders do.
Right. Yeah. And just by paying attention to our kids. And the other thing is by using the math in real life. I mean, that's the other component. It's not just ignoring math. It's teaching our kids to use money, having them use money to keep score on games. So they're counting by 5s and paying them with coins so that they can understand counting by 5s and 10s and quarters with money, and helping them estimate when we go shopping, and having them cook in the kitchen so they know fractions and understand half and doubling recipes, you know, all those things. If they are using math in real life, then when they go to apply it and to see it written down, it makes sense. They have a background of experience to draw from that's going to make the math really, really easy.
Yeah, because it's like, oh, okay, here's like a shorthand way to put in writing all this stuff you've been doing in your head.
Right. And I think one of the things that we face as homeschool moms is that in our culture, we equate math and intelligence.
Yep.
If your children are good in math, they're smart. And if your children are good in math, you've done a good job homeschooling. You're a success. If your children are bad in math, then they're a failure, you're a failure, and they're stupid. Now, that's not at all true. There's so many ways a child can be brilliant. It doesn't have to be brilliance in math. Our kids have all kinds of different strengths.
Mm-hmm.
But culturally, the grandparents say, how are your kids in math? You know, have you learned long division yet? If a child feels like he can't do the math that the other kids can do, he feels stupid. And that's, again, not true at all.
Yep.
But culturally, we have that. So as moms, we're afraid to step out of the box, to move into something different from what the experts say is the way we should go, because who am I? And if I happen to mess this up, like you said, you know, I've ruined my child,
right?
Because they can't do math. And so there's this whole social pressure that's not real, but it's there. I mean, it's not accurate, but it's there.
Yeah.
And so it's hard, you know, it's easier for a lot of us to step out of the box in history or language than it is to step out of the box in math.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So, and this isn't something that I told you ahead of time I was going to ask, but it's just occurring to me that it would be helpful for moms to hear. So you mentioned history, and I think we all kind of get, like, you could learn about the Civil War, even if you haven't nailed down ancient Rome, right? Like you could pick a time in history and you could talk about it, but we have in our minds that math must be very, like, you know, it has to go in this order. You can't do this until you've done that. How true is that?
Yeah. That is not true at all. And that's one of the reasons that our curriculum is so effective, because we give you the freedom to teach anything in any order. Now, obviously, there are certain things that you have to know before you can learn something else. But take, say, averaging, okay? If you're going to do averaging pencil and paper, you have to know division. But if you're going to average with objects, you can do an activity that includes your whole family. You can teach your younger children the concept of averaging, even if you're only teaching your older ones how to do it with pencil and paper.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of times when, even if there is a sequential requirement, you can still teach the concepts if not every piece is in place. And then if you look at all the different kinds of math books out there, you know, Saxon, Matthew C., Right Start, all these different things, they don't use the same order.
That's right. They do not.
So it depends on your child. Some kids need the concrete things. They do better starting with geometric concepts because that's very concrete and they can get a lot further in that area. Other kids are fine doing something more abstract. It just depends on your child.
Yeah. So,
and it also, one other thing that I think is it really helps if you can put the math in context. For example, Roman numerals, who cares when you learn that? But if you're studying ancient Rome, or you are reading a chapter book that has Roman numeral headings, or you're going on a field trip and you're going to see Roman numerals on statues, if you are teaching it because there's a reason to learn it, it's much more efficient than teaching it at, you know, teach the I's and the V's at first grade and the X at sixth. You know, that doesn't make near as much sense as just teaching it all when there's a reason to learn it.
Yep. Yes, I completely agree. Completely agree. So, you know, one of the things that we mentioned earlier on, just kind of in passing, is that sometimes when moms get anxious about being behind or not doing enough or something like that, it leads to, you know, like, let's do more. Like, we just have to, you know, cram it in because I have this fear that they're behind. And so let's just like shove, you know, 1.5 times as much math down their throats every day so that we can, like, quote, catch up. But one of the things that kind of blew my mind about Math on the Level was that basically, and, you know, I will send you guys to a link where you can read more about this, but basically our kids are doing how many math problems a day?
5.
So does that blow anybody's mind? Does that sound a little surprising? Like, you know, 5, like, you know, and do you think that the number of math problems we see in a traditional textbook probably has maybe more to do with, like, teachers need a half an hour's worth of math to keep everyone busy after they finish their math lesson than it does to do with, like, actually how much practice is needed?
I think that's very accurate. Yeah. It's more about crowd control or, you know, keeping the kids busy. Because unless you do the math over time, you're not going to remember it anyway. You could do 10 pages of one concept. And if you don't do it again for 3 years, you're not going to remember it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so, just another like brief flyby about math on the level, this program is designed to teach a lot of math in real life so that you're experiencing these things with your kids. But then to practice the paper and pencil, just briefly, 5 problems a day. And usually it depends on what they need practice with, but usually it's 5 different things. So they might be doing like one practice with money and one practice with fractions. And it's kind of like just a quick flyby, like, let's just keep this fresh in our minds kind of thing. Yes. And when the program was started, when I found out about it, it's set up so that there are lots and lots of sample problems. So moms can pull like, okay, I think we need to practice this. And there's a great record keeping system. So you can keep track of what they've learned, what they need to practice. But, you would by hand pull out, and I think we use spiral notebooks or something like that, pull out 5 problems for them to do. But then I think, was it 2 years ago that you guys introduced the online 5-a-days?
Yeah.
Okay. So they developed basically an online program where you can put in what topics you need your child to review, and it'll automatically generate worksheets and answer keys. So you don't have to write it down by hand. And what I've loved about sharing about the online 5-a-days is that this could go with any curriculum. Like even if you're not using math on the level, it's super inexpensive, very easy to use. And you could say like, okay, we need a little more practice with this, or I need a better way to review this because our curriculum only does like 30 bazillion problems of double-digit addition and nothing else or something like that. So what I'm going to do, we're going to get to our questions in just a minute, but I'm going to pop up a little button at the bottom of the screen. And let's see, who was it? Rochelle. Rochelle had asked earlier, do you have a link for math on the level? So I'm going to send you a little bit of a roundabout way, because 2 years ago, I had the privilege of interviewing Carlita in a text format, I think we did it over email. And I shared that interview on the blog, and it was so great. It was one of those like information with a whole lot of encouragement mixed in. So if you found tonight helpful and you want more, definitely go check that out. The link at the bottom says enter the drawing, because right now, John and Carlita have offered to give one person a 1-year subscription to the online 5-a-day program. So if you click the link at the bottom, you will be able to learn more about math on the level. There is a link in that website, in that interview, to go to Carlita's website and learn more about math on the level and all that. But there's also at the bottom, there's a giveaway. So if this sounds interesting to you and you'd like to enter the giveaway, that's live just through Friday. But I did want to tell you about that because it's an awesome opportunity. It does not matter what math curriculum you're using. You could benefit from those online 5-a-days.
Can I make one quick question statement before we go on?
Go for it.
Since there's a lot of people who have older kids, I wanted to say just a couple things about the older kids who are having trouble with math. First of all, whether you use math on the level or not, the advantage to math on the level with older kids is there is no grade level. So if you have a child who's a teenager and struggling, it's easy to go back to the beginning, check every concept, and find the areas where they're struggling without having to put them in a 2nd grade book or a 3rd grade book. But I did want to tell you a story about my daughter, who I have 2 girls. My oldest is really good at language arts. My younger daughter is really good at math. And so the older one always felt kind of inferior to her younger sister, felt like she was bad at math. She wasn't bad at it. She just wasn't ready for it as soon. Mm-hmm. When we got to high school, I made the mistake of pushing her into algebra too soon. And within 2 weeks, she hated math and thought she was stupid, which I've always felt really badly that I did that, because up until then, she really didn't think she was bad at math. And she wasn't. She just wasn't ready for it. And I knew that. But I wrote a math curriculum, and it's a lot easier to tell other people not to do it than to do it yourself. So I pulled back. I did a lot of other things with her in math. I had her help her younger brother with math. We went through some kind of consumer math things. I didn't push algebra. Every year I would kind of check and see if she was ready for it. But algebra requires abstract reasoning. And she just wasn't there. I kept getting the deer in the headlights look. So middle of 11th grade, I sat down and we were looking through this and I was explaining it. And I said, you're understanding this, aren't you? And she said, she was kind of, didn't want to admit it, but she said, yeah, actually I am.
Mm-hmm.
In a year and a half, we went through Algebra 1, Algebra 2, geometry. She did really well on her SATs, got into the honors program at college, graduated from college with a 4.0, did beautifully. But I had to wait until she was ready. And when she was ready, it was easy to teach.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a high schooler who really doesn't have the abstract reasoning yet, you're a lot better off to go back, make sure you've got those initial skills, especially fractions. Make sure they really understand that. And then when they're ready, you can do it fast, a lot faster than if you just keep making them feel stupid all through high school.
And what a gift that we can do that for our children.
Yes. Yeah.
All right. So we have a couple of questions that are just quick, brief questions that I'll go ahead and do. So Rochelle had asked, is online 5-a-days the same as math on the level?
Okay. The online 5-a-days is basically a way to write our review, to automatically generate the 5 review problems a day. What we do is when a child masters a concept, for the first little while, they'll do 1 problem a day. They'll practice 1 problem a day at that concept. Then you move it to an every 2-day schedule, then every 3 days, 4 days, week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and 4 weeks. Your goal is to move it to once a month. But when they review it, they just do 1 problem, because if they do 1 correctly, then you know they remember how to do it. If they miss it, you don't want them practicing it wrong. So the 5 review problems are a way to continually review what they need to review at their pace. And this, so the 5-a-day works with Math on the Level to review the concepts that we teach with Math on the Level. Now, the online 5-a-days can be, like I said, it can be used with Math on the Level. We have a way where you just, there's a spreadsheet that keeps the records. You do a copy paste and it will put the scheduled review problems right in. If you don't use Math on the Level, there's a drop-down menu. So you can just use the drop-down menu to choose which concepts you want to review. And that way it's not tied to Math on the Level, but it still lets you do a 5-a-day kind of review.
Yeah, and the categories are really self-explanatory, like multi-digit addition with regrouping or without regrouping, you know, so you can see exactly what you're getting there.
Right.
Let's see. And then also, so Jerry says, I would like to have the 5-a-days. Where do I go? So Jerry, what I would recommend is, first thing is click the button below and enter the giveaway, because you might get a free copy of it. And then if you
try that first.
If you end up winning the giveaway, then I will be emailing folks when the giveaway is done, and I will absolutely be sure to include a link so that anybody who didn't win but who was interested in that will know where to go. All right. Yep. So let's see. Here's our next question. Michelle says, how does Math on the Level work with a child who has dyscalculia?
Okay. Anytime you have any kind of learning issue, what you want to do, again, is to break it down in small pieces, put it in real life so there's a context to what you're teaching, and then review consistently. And one of the problems with dyscalculia, well, kind of all those things are issues that you'll have with dyscalculia. There's a difficulty in doing the calculations when there's no context. And so putting math in context is huge with kids with dyscalculia. You can also, by doing the review, the consistent review, you're going to start where they have learned something and not let them forget it. Because often once they've learned it, if you don't have that consistent review, if you're just going to review it, once a year or so, come back on the spiral, they won't remember it well enough. It's like starting over every time you do it. So having that consistent review is really, really helpful. Every child with learning issues, although we kind of clump them under certain labels, they're still all unique.
Yes.
And so I think it's really important when you're dealing with a learning issue to find the child's strengths. And if the child, for example, really loves art, then teach math when you're teaching art. If you have a child who loves to write, is creative, likes to do stories. I used to do math stories in the car. There's a section in Math Adventures on doing math stories. Bring your math into a story. Teach where your child has interests and strengths, and that will really help. And teach in small enough chunks that you're not overwhelming them. Mm-hmm. There's so many things, but that's...
Yeah. And Kim wants to know, will there be a replay available? Yes, Kim, I love Crowdcast for many reasons, but one of them is that about 5 minutes after we're done in this very same spot, the replay is going to pop up immediately. And you can always catch it on YouTube. Every video that I do here on Crowdcast immediately becomes a video on YouTube. So you can watch it here in the same Crowdcast link, or you can search on YouTube for the data about falling behind in math and find it there.
And also, if anybody has a question after this is over, there's a Contact Us button in Math on the Level's website. You're welcome to put your questions there. I'll be glad to get back to you if you have a specific question. If you're watching this on the replay and you have a question, just go to Math on the Level, use the Contact Us, and I'll be glad to get back to you.
Yep. That's how I got in touch with Carlita, so we could schedule this. So I can vouch for that. It works. So there's a link. I'm going to drop a link to Math on the Level. And then you can also find, if you go to that page, you'll also be able to find the information about the 5-a-days. As a matter of fact, let me just go ahead and drop a link to that as well, so that it'll be easier to find. There you go. Math on the Level and the 5-a-day review, the online option. So, okay, well, I'm going to give everybody just 1 or 2 minutes more in case they've got more questions that they'd like to drop in. While you're thinking about this, if you found this video helpful, if you found it encouraging, please do share it. If you're on Facebook, you know how to do the sharing thing. If you're here in Crowdcast, there's a little button at the top that says share with a little arrow pointing in the corner. And if you click on that, it'll give you all the options of like Facebook or email or, however you'd like to share that, so that other folks can hear, not just about Math on the Level, that too, but, about thinking about your child being behind in math. All right, Michelle says, thank you, ladies, so much. I recently heard from a friend about Math on the Level. I was thrilled that you offered this podcast. It helped give me a big picture of how this works and if it would be helpful for my daughter. Michelle, I'm thrilled to hear that. I couldn't, have heard a better thing, that this gave you a good look at how it benefits us, and not just the nuts and boltsy of the curriculum, but I feel like hearing Carlita's philosophy and her thinking about math. Almost to me, that was the most helpful thing about Math on the Level. It wasn't, not that the material isn't helpful, but it was the perspective shift that was game changing for me.
Exactly. The whole thought that math has to be textbook, and that's what math is. I've had moms come up to me and say, my child is so bad at math, I don't know what to do. And I said, well, what have they learned? What are you working on? And they'll say, oh, well, we're still working on math facts. And I think that math facts are important, don't get me wrong. But if your child thinks that math is math facts, that's really boring.
Yeah.
If they're stuck on that, there's a place for it, but that's not math. And math is so much bigger than that. We can be doing math all the time, and everything we're doing. I had a man come up to me one time, and his kids had just listened to me talk at a convention. And he said, after we talked to you yesterday, this morning, my kids were dividing their bagels into fractions and talking about the fractions in their bagels. And I thought, that is so cool, because math is all around us. We can be doing math everywhere. It doesn't have to be a book, and we don't want our kids to think that's math either.
Yes. Amen. I love that. Yeah. And, just to think about kind of empowering moms to be the expert on their own child, and,
Exactly.
to do what each child needs, and to kind of, buffer yourself, and especially buffer your children from all that external pressure that says, but you're a 4th grader and this is what 4th graders are supposed to do. I've had moms say to me, we're stuck on multiplication facts. We've been in this chapter for like 3 months now because we can't seem to get beyond it. And I'm like, oh, please give your child a break, go do something else. Like
Yeah,
multiplication
yeah,
facts for 3
exactly.
months will kill anybody's joy of
Oh,
learning.
goodness, yeah. Yeah, and it's so important that the kids understand too. I've used that Olympics example with kids to help them understand that just like their bodies mature differently, that you could have somebody who didn't walk till they were 14 months old become an Olympic racer and get a gold medal in the Olympics. They mature differently. They could be brilliant in math. It just might take them a little longer.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Yep.
Because we don't want our kids feeling like they are bad at math just because they didn't understand something at a certain age.
That's right. That's right.
And then for our part, we need to make sure that we're not, if they don't understand it, we're not dropping it. We're still using math in real life, giving them those foundational experiences so that when they're ready to learn, they'll take off. You know, we don't want to be just saying, okay, my kid's not ready for math, I'm not going to do anything. You know, that's not it at all.
Yep.
So,
you know. I loved what you said about it, the cultural expectations we have. It was really mind-blowing to me. Recently, we read a biography of Isaac Newton, and, you know, everybody would think of him as like a pretty mathy guy. And he went to, I forget if it was Oxford or Cambridge, but, you know, one of those institutes of higher learning. And while he was there, he was obsessed with reading about mathematics and logic. And his colleagues would say to him, like, why are you doing that? That isn't in the curriculum. Because this was a humanities school, right? This was a school where they were studying like philosophy and religion and history and that kind of thing. And so mathematics was just this like weird, quirky habit that he had on the side. And, you know, so it really kind of helped me to realize, like, yeah, our current obsession with like math as a measure of your intelligence, it really is a cultural thing. It's not this,
it is
like universal human law that this is connected to how intelligent you are.
Yeah. And it isn't something that they have to master at a really young age. You know, I think I mentioned to you when we were talking at the convention that one of the things that a lot of schools are doing when their algebra scores are really low is they're starting to teach algebra at a younger age because they think if they start learning it earlier, then they'll be better at it when they get to high school. But really what that's doing is discouraging the kids at an earlier age, because the kids who aren't ready to learn it at 4th grade certainly aren't ready to learn it at 2nd grade. You know, so it's just compounding the problem instead of fixing it.
Yeah, instead of giving them the tools that they need to think about themselves developing as learners. Yeah. Michelle says, yes, this helped lessen my anxiety over her struggles and the feeling of her being behind. Working toward her strengths and interests has been a game changer to restore her love of learning. The idea of grasping the concepts as her brain matures is a fabulous paradigm shift for me. Yes. Amen.
Yes.
So true. Yeah. So, you know, when I was a first-time mom, my son started walking a little earlier and I was like, oh, look, I'm a good mom. I'm such a good mom because my child is walking early. Right. And you guys can all laugh at me. That's fine. But I was thinking recently of, you know, we really have to kind of swallow that same pill when it comes to all other areas of their life. Because I had, you know, thankfully it was my 4th child who walked much later, like 18 months. And actually the pediatrician did say, like, maybe we need to do physical therapy. But, you know, by your 4th kid, you're a little more chill than with your first one. And so I was able to say, like, well, yeah, she's not walking yet, but I've seen her go from, you know, rolling over to sitting up to crawling. Like, she's doing all the things just at a little bit later time than everybody does. And of course, you know, now she's 9 and no one would ever have any concept that she walked later. Like, there's nothing about her now that would make you say, like, oh, she must have been a late walker.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's harder, I think, sometimes to wrap our heads around that when it comes to education and brain maturity in terms of learning, because we somehow put that in a different box, even though I have a feeling that we really don't, as moms, have as much control over what they learn as we imagine that we do.
Yeah. Well, so much of learning is almost absorbed. It's just the kids see the things around them and they learn that way as much as from our direct instruction.
Yep.
And as long as we don't kill their learning by, just putting books in front of them that have no interest in. I mean, we can kill learning pretty easily, but as long as we keep the interest alive and keep them interested in learning and keep it at their pace and through their strengths, it's not that difficult.
Yeah. Yeah. Good stuff. Really good stuff. Well, Carlita, I had a feeling that this was going to be a really good one, and I was not disappointed. I knew that you'd have some really encouraging things to share with moms. So
thanks.
Make sure you guys to hop over and enter the drawing if that online 5-a-day sounds interesting to you, which I hope it should, and to read more about Math on the Level. Because like I said before, whether you end up going with that curriculum or not, just thinking about math in the way that Math on the Level does, it is a light bulb moment. It really will be a light bulb moment for you. And a lot of the same kinds of encouraging thoughts that Carlita has shared with us tonight. So thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to be with us and to encourage our moms in their math learning with their kids.
You're welcome. It's been a lot of fun.
All right. Thanks.
Okay.